Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Manga Book Club. It is March, and I'm a little bit sick at the moment, so apologies if my voice is a bit under the weather. This month we have been reading Usogui by Toshio Sako, a gambling manga that goes to about 540 chapters. So this was a bit of a read this month. Honestly, a bit of a breeze, though. This manga slapped. It was so good. Let's give a bit of background before we get into the arcs and talking about the actual story itself. So the manga began in 2006 and ran through until the end of 2017, and it has sort of 11 main arcs, being the main games that are played through the manga. This is a very mind gamesy manga, so very much in the vein of things like Liar Game or Tomodachi Game. Those series where you have the very big brain protagonist who goes into these sort of mind battles against very arrogant opponents, and we get to watch them crumble in very cathartic conclusions. That pretty much sums up the genre, really. Like Season 0 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Same sort of vibe. So the overarching plot is following our main character, Marame Baku, also known as the Lie Eater Usogui. And he's going up against this organization known as Kakaro. I think that's the pronunciation. Apologies if wrong. But they are basically this big organization that come in to facilitate gambles and to make sure that the losing side pays up and to ensure that the rules of the games are being followed. The leader of this club is called Leader, funnily enough. And in the past, Usogui has challenged Leader to this surpassing the Leader game. This ultimate gamble where you put everything on the line to see if you can sort of supplant Leader's position as the head of Kakaro. And in the past, Usogui has failed, meaning his life is forfeit to Leader, and so the arcs sort of follow Usogui's plan to, first of all, get rid of that baggage and that history in his life, and it's very clever how he ends up getting rid of it. And then the second part is all about Usogui re-challenging Leader to see if he can take over Kakaro. That being the sort of overarching story of the manga. We also learn about the referees that Kakaro has, and the referees are basically the people who come in to facilitate the gambles. So you have members of Kakaro who are the gamblers, and then you have the referees who come in to facilitate those gambles. And they are listed from numbers 1 to 49? It might be up to 100. I can't remember if it's 49 or 100. But they're ranked down to number 0 being the strongest. So there is this sort of secondary plot going along with the referees, and it starts around the Abandoned Mine arc. So in the Challenging the Leader game, you have to be supported by the number 0 referee in order to do so. And so Usogui needs to take his own personal referee and get him to position 0, and this involves basically fights to the death against stronger and stronger referees. Because this manga isn't just a gambling manga. I'd say the gambling is maybe only like 60-70%. The rest of it is a lot of fights, and there is a lot of fighting in this manga. Like, this is half a martial arts manga, really. So that's the basic sort of premise. Let's get into some story arcs and actually talking about how the story went. So the first arc is the introduction arc, and it's attributed to just the opening 3 chapters where we sort of get the feel for the manga before the story actually kicks in. And this is just a couple of games that Usogui plays as he gets Kaji on his side, who will be his right-hand man from the rest of the manga. It's all very typical, there's some absolute scumbag and we're going to get some money out of them by outplaying them at every turn. The main part in here that I remember is the roulette game, where Usogui comes in and acts like a complete melon to make this roulette dealer completely take his guard down. The dealer is obviously cheating, and so he gets this scheme involved so he can lose a bunch of money, and then Kaji can come in and make a bunch of money off the losing. So while the roulette dealer is focused on Usogui, Kaji can come in and just clean the house out. It's absolute bread and butter for manga like this, watching the arrogant, greedy dude get outplayed by someone smarter than him, and then watching them crumble. It's so cathartic every time. It is the end of chapter 3 where we start to get some intrigue into what Usogui is actually doing. The chapter ends with Usogui saying that he needs a lot of money for some suspicious reason. And this is where the plot kicks off. And I should mention this in Arc 1, because from here on out, the plot doesn't stop. And this is one of the best parts of the manga. I know people will love the art. I know people will love the games. I know people will love the characters. I know people will love the situations. For me, the plot in this manga is so effectively done, it is absolutely shocking. From here on out, no arc is superfluous. No arc is wasted. There are things that come up in the rest of the manga where I went, oh, okay, this is kind of dumb. This is kind of stupid. This isn't going anywhere. And then I would read on and everything would pay off. And it is shocking how well put together this manga is. So from here on out, every single arc has a point in the overarching story of getting Usogui back into this challenging the leader game. And I mean every arc. Nothing is superfluous. Even when there's an arc where Kaji goes on his little side quest with the Burning Bull, and even that is significant to the overarching story. The manga is so focused, and the author has done such a good job of not just throwing aside things, but actually building on the building blocks that he has placed in previous arcs. It is, for me, the best part of this manga, is just how well structured it is. So the first real arc and the first sort of long game is the Escape the Abandoned Building. And this is where the manga just lays all its cards bare about what the manga is actually going to be about. Kakuro is introduced, we get some of the intrigue around why Usogui is playing these games, not just for money, but he seems to have a connection. We get our first big game, which makes up the story arcs. And most importantly, perhaps, it's where we learn that this manga is a lot more combat related than you would have expected going in. So in this arc, Usogui and Kaji are brought into this building and are basically coerced into playing a game where they have to either get out of the building to keep all their money, or they will get killed by the killers hiding inside. Kakuro comes in to facilitate the game, but this is really all about Usogui recruiting Rodimu, or Marco, as he will be called from here on out. And so the escape ensues, and we learn through this arc how good the art is going to be, because in the starting chapters, it was admittedly a bit shaky, and I wasn't too convinced about what it was doing. I mean, those early chapters, it felt a bit like the author didn't really know what he wanted to do with Usogui's design, so sometimes he was a bit more street, and sometimes he looked like some beatific Korean god from webtoons. But this arc really cemented the art style and showed off just how beautiful the combat scenes in particular are going to be. Like, it is absolutely gorgeous. And over the course of the manga, it's only going to improve. Once we get to the Labyrinth Arc, I think it sort of stabilizes into this very amazing art style. I think it's around these early arcs, the author is still kind of figuring out exactly how he wants the manga to look. And then so those later arcs from Labyrinth onwards, he really nails it down into something downright gorgeous that only improves as the manga goes on. But as for the story in this arc itself, I think there is one thing that gambling mangas really need to pull off, especially in this kind of story. It's the twist at the end. So typically the game will end and there'll be some, oh my gosh, how did you figure this out? How did you solve this? And then the big brain character will talk about his plan and explain everything that has happened, which if we're reading closely, we should have been able to follow along. And latter arcs do this very well. There are very clear tells and sort of setups to things that will happen. But for this arc, a lot of the winning strategy revolves around Usogui having gone to a chemistry lab at some point off screen in the abandoned building. And it feels like I missed a chapter somewhere, but I don't think I did. Usogui just says that at some point off screen he went to this chemistry lab and got all these chemicals that would help him beat Rodimu in the final fight. But we never saw him go to the chemistry lab. So the twist is just, oh, these things happened, but you have no clues on how to solve it. So unless I'm like a real big dummy and missed a chapter somewhere, ending of the first game, not a huge fan. But then the secondary sort of twist where Usogui has taken Rodimu and used him to hunt down his own father to sort of invert the game, that was really clever and really well handled, especially when the overarching narrative is all about how Usogui wants to recruit Rodimu, or Marco as he'll be from here on out. It's all very well handled. So despite the chemistry room slip, I think this is a really clean arc to set the template of what these following arcs will be. The next arc is the Abandoned Mine arc, where Usogui faces off against this, well, domestic terrorist, and the setup for this one is a bit strange. So the gauntlet has been thrown, Usogui comes into this abandoned mine to have his battle against this other Kakuro member. And then we talk for a good little while about Hangman, and we assume that's going to be the game, but no, Hangman's kind of the sub-game, it's the execution method of the game. And the actual game they're going to be playing is Old Maid. And so it's this weird setup of one game where it completely pivots to being about a completely different game. But this game really sets up the infamy that Usogui has. So Usogui doesn't have enough to pay for his side of the gamble. And so the referees call in other Kakuro members to fund him. And he just gets so much money because he has just gained such a level of reputation within the community. I think this is the first real chance we see like the absolute power that Usogui already has and has already established. The game itself between the two members is honestly probably one of the weaker ones of the manga. Some of them go more into the intellectual and mind games direction, and some of them tend to be more luck-based. This is one of the ones that could have been more mind gamesy, but we learned the villain was cheating the whole time, so there isn't really any mind game stuff until right at the end. So this game isn't quite as interesting as some of the other ones that we'll see later on. But this arc is set to a pretty interesting side story. So while there is the mind game stuff going on inside the tunnel, outside the tunnel, there is this sort of terrorist plot where the villain is going to send some missiles at this building, and it's being protected by Kiara, who will become a very important character later on. And there's also Ranko and her bodyguard, who is the lion dude, whose name I don't really know, but I always just thought of him as Leomon from Digimon, because I'm a nerd. And the secondary arc is all about Marco teaming up with Leomon to go and take down Kiara and stop the missiles before they are launched. And we also meet Carl as well, who is the arms dealer who will become a part of Usogui's team for the middle of the manga. He dips out in the Battleship Arc. And I think the manga manages to get that balance right. There is a good balance between the fights going on outside and the mind game aspect stuff going on inside. Personally, I am enjoying that mindscape stuff more than the fights, but the fights are really good. Like, they are unreasonably well done and well drawn for a manga that's not really about them. I remember as I was reading this month, I took a break around chapter sort of 51, 52 at the what I thought was going to be the end of the gamble. Usogui has won, the other dude is going to be hung. Cool, this seems like a natural place to take a break and pick the manga up another day. So I do, and then I pick the manga up another day, and all of a sudden the next chapter is the leader arrives with like his whole squad, and now he's in here, and there's this secondary plot where Kakaro has put this massive bid on some shares of the company that's about to get bombed. They're in store to make a bunch of money as long as the missiles go off. And then the leader says that he's an alien, and I was so confused. I'm just absolutely baffled as to what I came back to. Genuinely, seeing the leader with his face in shadow the whole time and him talking about being an alien, I was expecting aliens. I was expecting this manga to go to some really crazy places where Kakaro was this evil alien organization and the leader is some evil reptilian who's here to take over the world or something. Obviously, that didn't happen, thankfully, and the manga takes a much more realistic direction. But that was a very jarring cut to come back to. But then the game ends and we see the villain of the piece get hung, and that was honestly surprising. I wasn't actually expecting to see him get hung, and yeah, Usogui is not going to pull its punches when it comes to showing people getting killed. I think the grossest it gets for me personally is the Battleship Arc, where we learn about the neckties that the captain likes to do. Pretty gross. But let's get into the next arc. So the next arc is the Labyrinth Arc, and this is where we start to learn more about the other organizations that are in power around Japan. So the ones that the manga focuses on are the police, which is the main focus of this arc, but there's also the setup, which might have happened at the end of the Abandoned Mine arc, when Leader gets a phone call from this rival organization called Ideal, who will be sort of our main rivals of Kakaro for the rest of the manga. As for the Labyrinth Arc itself, it's set up with this guy who works as part of the police, and he sets up a gamble where he takes people's memories for a certain day. So he'll gamble with someone and offer them a bunch of money if they win, but if he wins, he gets to take their memories of a certain day. Why he's doing this is to take away a person's alibi, so he can pin crimes of very influential politicians or policemen on these losers of the game. We first see Kaji come in and get suckered by this guy, and so he has to go into hiding, and then Usogui comes in and starts gambling. He first gives up a day and he wins, and then he sort of talks his way into a second fight where he offers up a very certain date. And did anyone else catch this as well? Because I think the manga set this up really beautifully. There's been a lot of talk about the Surpassing the Leader game, where Usogui forfeited his life in the gamble to Leader. So when Usogui wants to gamble away a very specific date, immediately I had this massive grin on my face because I knew exactly where this was going. Again, the manga has every arc setting up something or adding to Usogui's team. It's something to do with the overarching plot and the overarching narrative. Seriously, the arcs are done so well to fit into this overarching story. The gamble changes from writing out these little labyrinth puzzles into doing it for real. So in this underground base, they have a number of interconnected rooms that can set up a labyrinth board like the one they have on the pieces of paper. And so the game turns into this physical one as well as a mental one. Usogui has to go against this very clever member of the police force, and then some muscle is brought in as well, so he brings in Mako, and his opponent brings in this absolutely beefy unit from the police squad. So we get a couple more fights in this arc, and there's some things I want to mention about the fights. We first start at a very high ceiling. So Mako is like roided out. He's one of the strongest people in the world. He's been trained since birth to like overcome his limits and whatever. And that's the baseline. And so the manga still needs Mako to lose fights. And so every single other person who comes in to fight is also like a crazy roided out killer. So every arc has some backstory around the tough guy in the arc and explaining why he's so crazy strong, etc., etc. And it's kind of cheesy and melodramatic in ways that I really enjoyed. So it's not like, I trained for like 20 years and I got very strong. It's, I can see better than anyone else, or my muscles got bigger and bigger while staying the same size, and so I'm crazy strong. Really like crazy sort of fringe science stuff to explain why everyone is just so damn strong. The other part to mention on the fights, I guess, isn't strictly about the fights themselves, but it's about how death is done in the manga. So in this arc, Mako is assumed to be killed, and in the following arc, Carl is assumed to be killed. And in, I think, the previous arc, or it might be in one of the coming arcs, Kiara is assumed to be killed. And they all turn out fine. I really hated that. I don't think fake-out deaths are very exciting. I think it really undercuts the tension. But like most things with Usogui, whenever I have a complaint, later arcs completely pay off the reason for the complaint and make it a positive. So in this case, there's all these deaths and fake-outs, and so you get to the point of, oh, okay, death doesn't really matter for the good guys. They're always going to get out fine. Whatever, the manga has set this up, and this is just a stupid pattern. But no, the manga has set this up as a deliberate pattern, because later on, it's going to subvert this, and a character is actually going to die, and it's going to be very significant, and you think they're going to get out. But no, you're going to see their corpse rot in real time. So at this point in the manga, I was a bit annoyed at the sort of lack of consequences of death, but as far as the manga goes, it knows what it's doing and is eventually going to pay that off. So anyways, the Labyrinth game continues and Usogui ends up with the win, meaning that he gets rid of his memories of that day. Also, he manages to pick up a document detailing some of the other crimes that were committed that the whole Labyrinth scheme was trying to get alibis for. So not only has it been really important to the overarching Usogui story, it's also setting up the next two arcs, which will all be about how this list is coming out and the people who are trying to stop all those secrets getting out. The next three arcs are all building off that list that Usogui just got. So the Bull's Worm arc is next, and that focuses on one character. And then there's the KY Declaration arc, which goes after 5 characters at once. And then the Tower of Karma arc, which goes after a bunch of massive companies. Of the 3, I think Bull's Worm is my favorite, and maybe some of the darkest that this manga gets. Usogui actually isn't in this arc. This is a Kaji game going up against the son of a famous businessman. Alongside them is Ranko and Leomon from earlier, basically facilitating the game. And they're playing a game of stop the clock and guess the time. And whoever loses has to get inside a Sicilian bull. And this is dark, just really effectively communicated. So when I'm going through books for book club, I tend to write like a couple of notes as I go. Nothing too crazy, just leaving myself some details of how I was thinking at the time. And my notes for this arc are me just complaining backwards and forth about whether or not the twists are cool. Because it's like, oh, this dude has a pacemaker and that's why he's keeping time. Oh, that's dumb. That wasn't set up at all. Oh, he doesn't actually have a pacemaker. That was all a big bluff. Okay, damn. That was actually pretty cool. And then it's the laser pointer. That's how he's doing it. That was set up so clearly earlier. Like, they made a big show and dance about this laser pointer for no reason. Okay, that's a real dumb twist. No, it wasn't that either. Another red herring. Okay, manga, you got me. You got me good. And then it turns out the actual twist was that he was using mosquito sound all along, and then Kaji has this big brain move where he checks the dust on the speakers and sets up a plan where he can keep time, and it's all just incredibly like 4D and clever and well laid out, and I'm just like, manga, I need to stop. You clearly have everything planned out ahead of time, and you have things set up, and it's all very clever and well done. I need to stop distrusting you, because you're doing great work. But anyways, in this arc is another time where a character dies, so Carl is presumed to have died, but he doesn't. And then it ends in this kind of strangely dark, but perhaps kind way, where Carl had stuffed his necktie in the hole of the bull, so whoever goes in will asphyxiate before they are tortured to death. I mean, watching people go into that bull was genuinely horrifying. Again, all praise to the art for communicating those ideas and the horror of the situation just so well. And I guess I should mention how Kaji's story is coming along. So Kaji's story is all about how he is wanting to become more like Usogui and upskilling and not becoming a sucker and getting better and better at the games. It's this very secondary sort of plot to go through the manga, where we're following Kaji's personal journey into becoming better and better, though the focus still remains on Usogui. Namely because Kaji's story just involves him getting better. It doesn't exactly have a moment of payoff like Usogui's does. But Kaji does manage to show off his skills and defeat the villain in this arc and prove himself that he does have the skills and the talent to be good at this sort of thing. The only other part to mention, which I think happens in this arc, is Marco goes to the dentist. And what happened to Marco at the dentist, y'all? It seems he had a very good time. Following the bull, we get into the KY Declaration, which is where Usogui kind of takes over a TV show. He's got Kaji set up as a panelist where all the other panelists have done some sort of crime that he knows about from that list. Also, the guy running the show has been involved in a hit and run, so Usogui has kind of blackmailed his way into controlling this new game. This is maybe the arc I enjoyed the least. So in most of the other arcs, there is one major villain which is being put up against, and we learn more about that villain, and we want to see that person crumble, essentially, at the end of the game. In this one, we have a panel of 5 people that we are watching crumble. And for me, it's the more personal 1 versus 1 challenges that are the real high points of this manga for me. And Usogui in this game isn't actually playing, he's more setting things up and letting Kaji play. This is all one big scheme from Usogui to take control of a certain news organization and move all of the sort of telecommunications infrastructure to the secondary tower. That tower being the location of our next arc. For this arc, however, I think the most interesting part for me was the host. So the host has been involved in this hit and run, but hosts a TV show where he publicly outs and shames criminals. It's something that he's quite torn up about, and over the course of the game, he just lets his pride go and chooses to reveal his crimes. The end twist being that, in fact, he hadn't done anything, and it was his manager that set him up to take the fall for the manager's hit and run. Nice, good twist. One of the more interesting reactions I had to this arc was realizing that I really enjoyed Usogui as a character, and this arc reminded me a lot of Akumetsu. So in Akumetsu there is a scene where he takes over the television as well. And in Akumetsu, I kind of hate the main character. He's arrogant, he's cocky, he's a bit of a Mary Sue, and a lot of those qualities I could also put on Usogui. And yet I am far more invested and enjoying Usogui's character far more than I did Sho's in Akumetsu. And honestly, I can't really point to exactly what has made me feel this way, but I think Usogui has done a great job of putting us on the side of Usogui and making us root for him, I suppose. But anyway, this arc ends, and it's time for Usogui to escalate things. With control of the broadcast tower and the public sort of built up into this frenzy, Usogui publicizes another game where he'll be revealing the major crimes of some of these larger companies. He's basically holding those larger companies and organizations hostage while he has these files and these secrets that might get exposed. If I was reading correctly, I don't think he actually has secrets for all of these companies, but it's rather that the threat of them is so real that he's leveraging that. This leads to a new gamble in the tower as someone comes in to try and stop Usogui. This is all part of the plan, so Usogui can get Kakaro in to basically defend the tower while this threat is remaining. The new gamble is about taking a number of marbles and trying to guess the combined total between you and your opponent. That number being the password to an account at the top of the tower. Much like in the Labyrinth Arc, both sides get their muscle brought in, and it leads to some pretty brutal fights all up, in, down, and outside the tower. But there is a lot going on around this gamble, so Kakaro have been brought in to defend the tower and defend the gamble. Meanwhile, the government are trying to kind of fight their way in so they can stop the broadcast. So we have secondary plot 1 of the standoff outside the tower between the police force and the Kakaro members. Even Leader goes to one of the chief police officers, and they play their own sort of sub-game about the fights between the two. And then subplot number 2 is that we have Ranko and Leomon up in the tower, and they seem to have done a heel turn, and they're working against Usogui this time. Though the twist is later on, I think they're playing both sides, and they end up just siding with whoever wins. And then subplot number 3 is that referee number 0 is called in to officiate this match. That means 2 things. Usogui's own referee can challenge number 0 and take his number, meaning that Usogui will finally be able to challenge the leader. And secondly, my dude number 0 rocks up with Heelys. What a king. The actual gamble itself has been laid out really well, and it's this guessing game of how many marbles has the other person taken, and we get a lot of details and charts of numbers and who could have what number, and they've narrowed it down to this many odds. It communicates the mind games really well without being too over-exposity. Now let me kind of detour for a moment to talk about Liar Game and how Usogui improves that formula. So Liar Game has a similar sort of structure where you have the 4D chess brain protagonist who goes on these crazy strategies to win the games. And in Liar Game's case, I found that manga very expository. So a lot of times you'll cut to people watching the games and they do that very classic thing of, oh man, he's doing this strategy, but he doesn't know that he knows that he knows that he knows he knows. And a lot of time is spent trying to explain the game and explain the mind games of it rather than just letting the games play out. If you've read that manga, you'll know what I mean. There is a game of musical chairs that takes so long. It is really interesting, but the game takes so long. Meanwhile, Usogui manages to take that description of the games and descriptions of like the strategies between players and make it really engaging and keep your focus. In Liar Game, there are times where it's just like pages of text and your eyes just kind of gloss over them. And meanwhile, in Usogui, it's just explained much more approachably, where the discussions of the gamble aren't just talking at the reader, but they are showing and discussing things to the reader. So all the gambles in Usogui end up being really entertaining. As far as this gamble goes, one of the important points is that to unlock the password at the top of the tower, you need to do a retinal scan. And at one point to stop that, the opponent goes and injures Usogui's eye. And to me, I read that as he stabbed his eye out. And it kind of looks like that, but then later on, Usogui has both his eyes. Was anyone else with me here that Usogui, it looked like he lost his eye? Of course, this all ends as you might expect. Usogui wins the fight, his referee beats number 0 and gets the number 0 position, and then Marco gets to overcome the fighting villain as well. So it seems like everything went Usogui's way. He's got the money, he's got the power, he's got the number 0 position, he is ready to surpass the leader. But then something happens to leader. Amnesia. So it turns out the leader has this recurring amnesia that just happens to him every now and then. And this will be just so important for the rest of the manga. There are some clever things that the manga will do with this concept, particularly around the final arc. And I've got to be honest, I'm not a huge fan. So the leader has apparently this personality that he reverts to when he loses his memory, the personality called Hal. And Hal has been instructed by his previous caretaker to go and find this particular book called The Bee Prince. And the Bee Prince book will help him get in contact with his caretaker. The problem is, time has gone on by this point, and the caretaker has died. So Hal is picked up by one of his seemingly old friends, who is a cop, and they go on their little side journey to basically do the Battleship Arc. Having the leader as a character that we follow is actually really good. I'm really enjoying that. The part I am less enjoying is the more sort of cliche backstory between Hal and Usogui, where Hal doesn't have his memories, and then he meets Usogui and the two become friends, but now they're rivals, and I just didn't really feel like these two characters needed this backstory where they were friends and buddy-buddy and get along. They could just be rivals. And yeah, I know the friendship thing pays off in the ending, but yeah, this whole sort of background thing didn't really gel for me. Also, the Bee Prince book is very oddly specific about the Usogui and Hal friendship. Like, it is oddly prescient about the budding friendship between these two characters for no reason in universe that I could see. It's like Ada the caretaker was like, oh, I see Hal and Usogui's budding friendship. This is my ward. This is the son of a cult leader, someone I'm raising to be a genius and the leader of Kakaro, but I want him to be friends with this random white-haired dude. So I'm going to write the book and hopefully they hit it off. Genuinely, did I miss something? Because that just felt really weird. Anyways, Hal goes on this investigation with his cop friend, which leads him to a boat, which is what the cop is investigating. Eventually, this leads into the next gamble between cop friend and the ship's captain. Meanwhile, Kaji is there kind of by coincidence as well. The gamble is over a game of Battleship, and this was really fun. I really enjoyed this game of Battleship. I think this was genuinely one of the funnest gambles. We've got the cop and the captain playing the game, and meanwhile, leader is out. He's checking all these containers because he's managed to mind game his way into the referees, so they've set up the containers on the boat like the ships in Battleship. It's just a lot of fun. Even when the captain is talking to plants or threatening Colombian neckties, everything is just really entertaining through this arc. Naturally, this arc ends the same way as the other ones, with the good guys winning and the bad guys losing. Then, something very important happens before the final 3 arcs. Leader gets challenged by Usogui, and the head of Ideal calls up Leader as well. So he organizes a 3-person meet where they set the terms. Before surpassing the leader can take place, Usogui and the head of Ideal are going to fight for that chance. Whoever wins that gamble will get the opportunity to challenge the leader and take over Kakaro. And so we go into the final 3 arcs, which are all building up to the surpassing the leader challenge. Now, I'm brand new to Usogui. This is my first time reading it, but from what I understand, people consider the last 3 arcs the real high points of the manga. And I agree with 2/3 of that. I think 2 out of these 3 upcoming arcs are probably my favorite. The one that didn't quite get to the heights of the others is the Protoporus arc. So this is the challenge between Vincent Lalo and Usogui. They're taken to an island which is the setting of an ongoing role-playing game, basically. On the island, there are 3 different kingdoms or communities, and the gamble is to see which one of them can successfully take over the entire island and unify the kingdoms. They start as the lowest player and have to sort of fight and work their way up to become the Kaiser within 28 days. And it has a really strong start. So we start with like the early small tier gambles as Usogui tries to get a little bit of money to get himself started. And then we get into the bigger gambles at the Colosseum. We learn how the rules work and the games work and how there's other players on the island who are like outlaws and criminals. Even the creator of the game himself is on the island, and the people who administrate the game are their own faction who need to be brought in to be considered in this big gamble. And this is just a big arc. There's so much going on. Some of the real key points to note is that Kiara is here as part of Usogui's team, and Kiara dies. Like, properly dies this time. No fake outs like before, he's dead. We see him dead sitting against the tree. He goes out after a very climactic battle with the real big heavy hitter of Vincent Lalo's team. It's a real nice ending point of the battles between the big beefy guys from the good guys team and the bad guys team. Also, just how that fight starts, Kiara runs up and just punches the dude's nose off, and the art is amazing. Also, this arc has maybe my favorite twist in the whole story. So it's about unifying the 3 kingdoms, and so we've got Vincent Lalo running one, we've got Usogui running another, and then on Usogui's team is Leader, who is running the 3rd kingdom. And how the game works is once someone becomes Kaiser, they have a week celebration, and then the game resets. So 8 days out of the deadline, Vincent Lalo charges into Usogui's kingdom and takes it over using a very clever strategy, and Usogui submits and gives over his kingdom. It's the most cunning ploy in the whole manga, because Usogui had already taken over the 3rd kingdom. So as soon as Vincent Lalo took over Usogui's kingdom, he was the Kaiser. Kaiser for 7 days, and then the game will be reset. And when that reset happens, the only person who can't be the Kaiser is Vincent Lalo. So as soon as the time limit is up, Vincent Lalo can only lose. Absolutely slick. The only reason that this arc doesn't go quite as high as the following arcs is because this is such a wide arc with so much going on. I'm not so invested in the developer stuff, I'm not so invested in the referee fights that are here. The more personal 1v1 challenges coming up, those are the real highlights for me. So Lalo is going to lose, so he spends the last week basically hunting down Usogui and friends. He manages to get himself some hostages and force the situation into a secondary gamble. So the point of Protoporus was supposed to be this final challenge between Usogui and Vincent Lalo, the winner being able to play the surpassing the leader game. And how this arc ends is in the exact same way as it started. Usogui and Vincent playing a completely different game on equal footing for the same reward. And I was writing my notes down at the end of this arc, and I thought to myself, this is maybe the only arc that doesn't have a point. The only important things that have happened is that Kiara has died, as well as some of Ideal's fighters. Okay, Usogui, I'll give you one arc which didn't really fit into the overarching story. That's okay. Or so I thought. But I'll get to that in the final arc. So then we get into the real final battle between Usogui and Vincent Lalo. Air Poker. This is my favorite game in the whole story. I don't know how to describe it. I just love this whole idea. It's life or death. Your money is literally how much air you have left to breathe. The rules are complicated, there are mind games involved, and this just feels like such a climactic conclusion between these 2 characters. The art is amazing, the descriptions are amazing, how the game is played and the strategies that unpack is so good. This arc is fantastic. The only thing that weighs it down is this calamity that's in the game. So you have this hand of cards, and you don't know how they're scored, but there is enough information to figure it out as you go along. Even figuring out how the cards work is part of the game itself. But then the calamity is just, there's this hidden rule, and if you breach this hidden rule, you're going to get punished. So in the either second or third round of the game, Usogui gets punished, which kind of arbitrarily brings the scores back to about even. And that's real dumb. This just feels like a rule that the writer put in to balance things out. Again, or so I thought, because Usogui is just so cleverly done. Every time I had a complaint with any of the games, including this calamity right now, Usogui always, and I mean always, paid it off later on. The manga just knows what it's doing and sets up things so well. So the calamity rule in air poker isn't arbitrary at all. There is a second game being played above the air poker table, which is part of the air poker game. This isn't an individual battle, this is still a team battle carrying over from Protoporus. So below they're playing air poker and trying to play cards that sum to good poker hands, and above they need to make those poker hands as best they can. That is so clever and fun, and what a good idea. And look, I know the art has been amazing through like most of this manga, particularly the latter half, but now the paneling just gets really clever as well. So we've got this upstairs, downstairs game going on, and instead of just page after page, the manga is now taking 2-page folds and cutting them in half horizontally. So the top half of both pages is following the upstairs game, and the bottom half of both pages is following the downstairs game. I had such a massive smile on my face. This was so cool. This was so cleverly done to reinforce the game itself. Some particular points to point out in this game is when Usogui gives Lalo the rule to the game, and so they both start wasting air as fast as they can. And then the ending double twist where characters have only been using half their air supply before they stop a tank. It's just such an engaging game that ends in such a tense way. Amazing. Just a purely amazing game at the center of this arc. But yeah, of course Usogui wins and we get into the final arc. Usogui versus leader in the final surpassing the leader game. This arc starts with the referees having a bit of a scrimmage to see who gets to oversee the game. Cool, Yako wins as expected, let's get to the good stuff. The dropping the handkerchief game is probably game number 2 of all-time best games in this manga. The near-death game is so evocative, and it is communicated so well. This is a near-death game, and you can just feel the characters being so near death through this game. The attention is high, the excitement is high, this game is really good. Especially for such a simple premise. Turn around when the handkerchief drops. Again, Usogui is just so well structured and so well planned out. The author has done such a good job of having later events build upon the events before them. Even in just the motif of this game in dropping a handkerchief. It's a near-death game where someone needs to drop a handkerchief. One of the secondary plots in the manga is all about Yako, who is Usogui's referee, rising to position 0. To challenge another referee is a 10-second fight to the death. It is a death battle that begins with dropping a handkerchief. And what's the final game? It's so well tied together. Speaking of tied together, why was Protoporus 28 days long? So Usogui could have his surpassing the leader challenge on this very specific day that has an extra second. The entire point of the Protoporus arc was to give Usogui 1 second in his final gamble. I mean, amazing, right? That's so cool. And the whole reason we had that Battleship Arc with amnesiac leader turning into Hal was to build up to this encounter. There is more narrative weight behind the gamble now because we know Hal better and we know the relationship between these two better. It's just so good. Everything has been set up so well. So we get to the gamble itself and everyone is watching in and it's incredibly tense and people are dying and coming back to life and dying again and it's just fantastic. Everything about this is amazing. This is how you do a final arc in a story. You pay off everything that came before it. So how does it all end? Well, Usogui wins, which, considering he's won every single challenge that came before this, shouldn't be overly surprising. But I found myself really invested in this story to the point where I didn't know who was going to win, and I was genuinely on edge. So, with leader losing the game and dying, Usogui goes on to take control of Kakuto. He gets his moment to celebrate with his team, finally getting that long-awaited and hard-earned victory. But then the manga kind of keeps going for a little while and kind of half sets up a sequel, which I don't know if it exists. Hang on. Okay, it looks like there isn't one, but is the author trolling people on Twitter? There's a post from 5 months ago saying Mararame Baku is back with some panels that apparently are from the Protoporus arc, so probably not. Okay, so there isn't a sequel, but back on topic. This last little section of the manga is very much so setting up another arc that doesn't come. Usogui is in charge of Kakaro, and he goes after these vice funds, and there seems to be 7 of them, and they're like this secret cabal who are like the next level of challenges they have to beat, and Kakaro is often talking to random terrorist cells who are apparently very important to Ideal, and there's all this stuff going on. And so this last little bit of the manga, it's not for me. I felt like the story very much ended at the surpassing the leader game. Also, I'm just a bit confused about what's going on now, because apparently Leader is alive again and maybe went to hospital and got better. And also Usogui is maybe dead and maybe alive. At some point, he got a heart transplant. I mean, did that happen in sequence? Has that happened just now, or did that happen right at the start of the manga? This other guy comes in who's like the head of one of the vice funds, and he looks exactly like old Usogui. Apparently, he has Usogui's heart, and this whole like operation and the fact that he's had a heart transplant was never mentioned up till now. Oh no, but if you go back and look at the panels, Usogui gets tired when he runs, and that means this was clearly foreshadowed. No. Usogui does a lot of good foreshadowing and paying stuff off, but this is not one of them. This was not part of the main story. So I'm not really sure where things end with the manga. I'm pretty sure Leader is back, and I don't know if Usogui is alive or dead, and there seems to be this challenge going on with the vice funds, and then the manga ends. I'll be honest, it really took the wind out of my sails right at the end, because the manga was fantastic. And then this last couple, like maybe 5-10 chapters is setting up all these things that aren't important to the story because it's trying to set up some sort of sequel that is not here. And don't get me wrong, like sequel bait endings can work. One of my favorite manga has a very obvious sequel bait ending, but it's also one of my favorite endings ever because just everything comes together so well. But in Usogui's case, not really. This is just kind of a flat ending to what was otherwise a phenomenal manga. Overarching thoughts on the story? This was awesome. This manga slaps. I am surprised it has rarely come across my attention before. Like, I had barely heard of this manga until people started recommending it to me. I mean, across the board, like the art, the story, the structure. Oh my gosh, the structure is just so good. Everything is just done incredibly well. And I know that this author has done another story, which is called Butter Kiwi. I have no idea, but I'm probably going to check that out because I have really loved this manga. And if that series is anything like Usogui, then I'm probably going to enjoy that a lot more. Plus, 157 chapters. That's like, 400 less than Usogui. You can smash that out in an afternoon. But yeah, Usogui, I think talking about it has kind of solidified my thoughts on the manga as it being something really fantastic and probably one of my top 10 moving forward at the moment. Those last 2 major gambles in air poker and the near-death game dropping the handkerchief, those are going to go down as some of the best mind game manga moments ever. I mentioned earlier on, but to me, the only sort of gambling manga that I've really got into before is Liar Game and Tomodachi Game. And between the two of them, I really only remember Musical Chairs and the King of the Castle game from Liar Game, and I'm honestly struggling to remember any of the games from Tomodachi Game. I remember enjoying reading Tomodachi Game, but I cannot remember a single one of the games. So if you're looking for other sort of gambling, mind-gamey manga, I can recommend those two. Liar Game is a lot more wordy and a lot slower. Tomodachi Game is a lot more fun, but clearly left less of an impact on me since I can't remember the games. And it's got a few weird moments in there, and some rather uncomfortable ones involving their busty high schooler character. I still think they're both worth checking out to see if they'll grab your interest. If you know of any more gambling-y manga like this, then definitely drop them in the comments because this was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I am eager for more. So yeah, Usogui. This was amazing. Great recommendation. Thanks, everyone. I'll admit I was a bit trepidatious going in, like 550 chapters. Mercy, it's going to take so long. But no, this was an absolute breeze. Like, even for a gambling manga. So I was expecting it to be very dense like Liar Game, and I'd be sitting there slogging through chapters. But no, this was an absolute blast. Great manga. So comments are open. Leave your thoughts on the manga if you would. And for next month, it looks like, hold on, we're doing Pokemon Adventures, Kanto and Johto. This is going to be a very different manga to what Usogui was. If you haven't read Pokemon Adventures before, I have done up through part 4. So I've gone to Sinnoh, I think it's part 4. But this is the Pokemon Company approved manga. And as a Pokemon fan myself, I found this manga like absolutely delightful, and I'm really keen to go through it again. It's been a while. We're just going to stop after Johto ends, so we're not going to read crazy amounts. This manga just goes on and on.
And that should be it for March. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along and joining the discussions. Remember to leave your thoughts on the community posts that come up and vote for what we're seeing next month. And don't forget to add some recommendations as well. Always looking for new stuff to check out. Thanks so much, everyone. This has been CG, and I will see you Gs in the next one.